Hi everyone, Sean Paul Ellis here from the Saturday Morning Cartoons podcast. Remember, that's morning with you. I promise to try to keep this short. I will probably break that promise by the end of these notes. Some quick pre-show announcements pertaining to some shout-outs. You guys have been great about this. Quick notes for our Spotify listeners. Yes, you get your very own note today if you're listening on Spotify. Congrats! And what is happening on today's episode and in the next couple months. So we have some shout-outs that I wanted to give on episode 85 on YouTube for our cat dog episode. Benjamin Lewis 75 said, LMFAO, you people are funny. Thank you, Benjamin Lewis. I really super appreciate that. I needed that today. Then from Twitter, we have Video Dragoon Lich. He said he actually shared with us a Bubblegum Crisis music video. He did not create this. It was for, I believe, episode 4 or 5 within Bubblegum Crisis. This was really awesome, and I loved watching this, so thank you so much. I really appreciate this, friend. And a quick note and a shout-out. I was recently on the Be Kind and Rewind podcast. You can check that out now on Spotify, anywhere where you listen to podcasts. Carlos from the show was extremely awesome about doing everything. I've already messaged out about this show, and I will make sure that I do so a couple times again this week. Go listen to that show. And I had a blast doing it. So thank you again, Carlos. Much appreciated. Some Spotify notes. Spotify just announced that podcasts have to have an MP3 format to be compatible with their service. This show that you're listening to is typically not in MP3 format, except for today's episode, which moving forward will be in MP3 format. So why does this matter to a bunch of you who are listening on Spotify? Because a bunch of episodes are probably going to be taken off Spotify as of the next week. Yeah, that's right. Spotify gave people about a 1 week's notice, which is insane. I am a one-man band over here with 229 episodes that I need to convert. It's going to take me a little bit of time. So thank you for being patient, and I'll hopefully have those up soon. So what are we talking about today? Today is our final episode in our month-long appreciation of Doug Kendall. How did Doug get his own dedicated month? Well, he went ahead and he dialed 202-681-4406. Don't worry about writing down this number. It's in our show notes and on our social media. He called in and left a voice message about some shows that he really wanted us to review. We have taken that to task, and we have done that for the entire month of February. If you call in and you leave a message, it ensures that you just get a proper shout out, and we will 100% review your cartoon. So today we're going to be talking about Bubblegum Crisis, and in March we're going to be doing more listener suggestions. And so we've got a pretty big list, and it's going to carry us through almost the entire end of this year. So you can call and leave us a message, or you can go on our Google form that we have that is on all of our social media in our link tree, and you can submit your cartoon today. So on this episode, yes, this very episode, we are, of course, talking about Bubblegum Crisis. I bring on a new friend, Khelan Bhatia. Khelan Bhatia is from the Homo Superior podcast. If you love comics, go check out Homo Superior. I've been on a couple episodes myself. All 5 of the people who are over there on that show are a delight. Today, we chatted about our anime exposure and our alter egos in the world of Bubblegum Crisis. All of this and more on today's episode. So now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to Saturday Morning Cartoons, the podcast that revisits, reviews, and ridicules some of the world's weirdest animated series. Coming to you all the way from Mega Tokyo in the year 2032, I will be your host, Sean Paul Ellis. And joining me today and looking very stylish in his own Night Saber hard suit, he also runs a gay nerdy podcast called Homo Superior, local DJ by night, and political hack. Welcome, Khelan Bhatia. Welcome, Khelan.
Thanks so much, Sean. And just to let you know, my mech suit is actually rented. I've got to return it after we finish this podcast.
So we're on like a Cinderella style clock right now.
A little bit. You know, if you can find a boot that fits me, or if anybody can, they'll be my prince, in shining armor.
It's quite a big boot.
Yeah.
And for some reason, the first thought that I had was somebody putting like a boot on a car, on a mech to prevent it from flying away.
I do have very big feet.
Perfect. Well, welcome.
Thanks.
If this introduction went right over your head and you are not familiar
with the cartoon that we are actually talking about today. We are, of course, talking about Bubblegum Crisis. This is a lot of fun for me. Again, we've talked about the fact that our listener, Doug Kendall, has called in and he has recommended every cartoon that we've watched this month, Technoman and Bubblegum Crisis. So I'm very excited to get into this. And I wanted to ask Khelan, what was your reference to Bubblegum Crisis? Is this something that you had watched, or what was your reference in terms of older anime in general?
So I loved anime as a kid. I grew up being obsessed with Robotech, which was an American amalgamation of 3 Japanese animes. And it was the first time, as a kid, watching long form serialized television in a cartoon rather than being episodic. So I love the animation. I love the more adult themes than you would see in your average Saturday morning cartoon. No offense there, Sean.
No, don't take it.
So I really liked it. And then, when I got a little bit older, even before, there were blockbusters and Hollywood videos that were ubiquitous on every corner. What a 90s reference, right?
No, because I'm about to get really deep into the weeds in a moment.
Oh, I can't wait. But I grew up in Houston, and there were these stores that were nowhere near close to where my parents live or where I grew up, that specialized in anime. And I remember walking into these video stores, and I never got a chance to rent the videos or buy the videos, which were hella expensive back then. This is even pre-DVD. You had to buy stuff on Laserdisc, buy stuff on VHS. And I remember seeing stuff like Vampire Hunter D and 80 Police, and then of course, Bubblegum Crisis. And I was like, what a weird fucking name. Bubblegum Crisis. It's is Juicy Fruit running out of stock? Is that the crisis we're talking about here? But no, it just looked
Big
really
Red Fiasco.
Yeah, but it looked really cool. It's it was all the mech that you would see in shows like Robotech or Gundam or other anime of that ilk, but they were all women, and I was like, oh, that was really cool. The fact that it was a female-centric anime, which you didn't really get to see very much in American cartoons unless they were cartoons, quote-unquote, for girls, like She-Ra or Gem and the Holograms,
right,
or things like that. Of course, being a young gay kid, I loved that stuff, but it was clearly meant for girls. Whereas, I mean, with anime, they had stuff that was action, adventure, sci-fi stuff that with female centric, with female leads, and I think that's really cool.
Absolutely. I mean, when I mentioned I was going to get really deep into this, I've talked last week about the fact that I used to work at a Blockbuster Video, and I worked at a Blockbuster during that weird time when they were transitioning out and getting rid of all the VHS tapes and moving to DVD format. A lot of what took place was they were taking all of these older anime VHS tapes and they were putting them into our discount bins, and they were marked down to $5. And then with I think it was a 30% discount that I got when I was there, I was walking away with VHS anime tapes for
$2, if that.
It was ridiculous. And I would come home with them, and I had probably already watched them and rented them from the store. I kind of thought it was me just kind of taking them to a new home. I was like, you guys don't belong in this discount bin. Let's just go home.
It's very generous of you.
Yeah, it was the act of charity that I did in high school. But there were so many different things that they had during that time, and I felt that they were all those late 80s, early 90s contemporaries that I didn't have exposure to, like Dirty Pair, Biohunter, Wicked City, Demon City, Shinjuku, Heroic Legends of Arislan. There were just all these.
I watch Heroic Legends of Arislan.
Did you?
Yeah, we rented it from the Hollywood Video near my parents' house, and I was obsessed with it.
I'm so excited. You're the only other person that I've ever had a conversation with that remembers that show.
I loved it so much, and I remember trying to find the subsequent episodes, or I guess they were little movies.
Yeah.
Try to continue the storyline, and they were really tough to find. It's for those of you who only grew up with streaming, you have no idea what Sean and I had to go through to be able to be completists. So count yourselves as very lucky.
Yeah, and it's hard because we go through, for any cartoon that we watch on this show, there's always, we can find it sometimes on a reputable streaming service. Other times we have to kind of go and venture into darker corners of the internet to be able to find some of these things. And it's always a challenge. But, with cartoons of this nature, and especially for Bubblegum Crisis, the first 2 episodes are actually available on Verve. That's VRV. We've talked about them before on the show. Verve, if you're listening, we would love to talk about a sponsorship. Absolutely adore your streaming service. So they have the first 2 episodes that are available right now. So we've actually had an opportunity to watch that first episode on Verve. Highly recommend checking that out. Now, you had mentioned that there was something that you had watched when you were younger, an older anime.
That's right.
That you couldn't identify.
So it was, I feel like I'm having a senior moment here, but of this anime I watched in the 90s, and it was female centric, and they were ostensibly police officers in Tokyo.
Okay.
But they fought demons and monsters and things like that. I remember like a pentagram being used quite often in the cartoon. And I cannot remember the name of it. So if any of your listeners can remember the name of this 90s anime of female cops fighting demons using pentagrams, let me know. They might have been like witches. It might have been some kind of witchcraft, but they're also cops for some reason.
Okay.
I'm of course piecing this from memory of 20 some odd years ago.
I'm shaking my head yes, because I feel like we have some listeners that are going to be able to help you out with this.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's a deep cut, but if you can, I'm sure your listeners can figure this out.
So if anybody knows, please at us. Don't at Charlie Visconage, as we've mentioned in the show before, but please at myself, as well as also Khelan, because we're trying to figure this out. We're trying to remember what this actual anime is. We talked about a little the fact that Doug has messaged us and has actually left us a note about why he loves this cartoon so much. And so if you're listening today and you're thinking to yourself, hey, Doug Kendall just got the entire month of February. I would like a month dedicated to the cartoons that I want to recommend as well. I can make that so easy for you. You can help us out by calling 202-681-4406. I said that number very quickly. Don't worry about it. It's in all of the show notes. All you have to do is call that number and you can leave us a voice message. Tell us what you want us to watch. Tell us why you loved this so much. And actually, right now, we're going to turn this over to Doug Kendall to tell us why he loves Bubblegum Crisis so much. Doug, take it away.
Hey, Sean, this is Doug Kendall from Lebanon, PA, and I'd like to recommend you check out Bubblegum Crisis. So this is an 8-episode OVA that came out, I think in the late 80s, and I first discovered it in the mid-90s. My friend Kevin introduced it to me, and I automatically fell in love with it. It's probably to this day still one of my favorite anime, and honestly, in my opinion, it's the quintessential 80s anime. I mean, it literally is perhaps the best encapsulation of everything in the 1980s in this show. It is amazing. Basically, very briefly, it's essentially women in high-heeled armored suits fighting Terminators. So if that doesn't get you to want to watch it, I don't really know what else to tell you. The show pretty much just throws you in and kind of explains stuff as it goes. So much like a lot of anime at this time, you kind of just got to go with it. But it's a lot of fun. I really do like it a lot. Another thing is that you mentioned you liked Writing Bean, but the guy who did the character designs for that, who created Writing Bean, did the character designs for Bubblegum Crisis. So it has a very similar look. There is also a remake of this that was made in the late 90s called Bubblegum Crisis 2040. That's a much better show in every way imaginable, but I still have a lot of affection for the original. So, but that one's worth checking too. Alright man, that's all I got. So, hopefully you'll check it out and you'll enjoy it. At the very least, it'll give you something to talk about. Take it easy, man. Take care.
Great. Thank you, Doug. As always, you can you can look for the number that we have in all of our show notes that we have on social media. Please feel free to give us a call and tell us why you love these cartoons. We will definitely dedicate an episode to you. It is the easiest and quickest way to influence the shows that we watch here at SMC. If you are unfamiliar with Bubblegum Crisis, let's get into a little bit of the history. So Bubblegum Crisis is a Japanese anime that was on from 1987 to 1991, and it is a cyberpunk original video animation, OVA, and it was produced by Umex, and it was animated by AIC and Artmic. The series originally planned to run for 13 episodes, but it was cut short after just 8. The series involves the adventures of the Night Sabers, an all-female group of mercenaries who don powered exoskeletons and fight numerous problems, most frequently rogue robots. The success of the series spawned several sequels, including 80 Police Files, which I can't wait to get into tonight because this was one of my favorites. The series started with Toshimichi Suzuki, intended to remake the 1982 film Techno Police 21C. However, he met Funji Fujiita, and the two discussed the ideas and decided to collaborate on what later became Bubblegum Crisis. Kenichi Sonata acted as character designer, which we've had Sonata design other characters that we've had for cartoons that we've talked about on this show. So this is kind of a joy to get back into this. And Sonata had designed the original 4 female leads, and Masami Obari created the mech design that we see. Obari would also then go on to direct episodes 5 and 6. I mentioned that the original series was only 8 episodes, cut short from its original intended 13, due to legal problems between Artmic and Umex, who jointly held the rights to the series. It was discontinued for that reason.
Wow.
Kind of a bummer that these two companies kind of had a big hit that a lot of people note as being quintessential late 80s, early 90s anime, and it's had such an influence, and they couldn't get their shit together.
Right. So it only lasted 8 episodes, and I've only seen the first. I think you've seen them all, Sean. Does it end on a cliffhanger, or do they wrap it up in 8 episodes, or?
So I have watched all 8 episodes.
Yeah.
At some point when I was working at a Blockbuster.
Yeah.
In my recap of going through everything for the show, I've only watched up to 6.
Okay.
So I haven't watched those final 2. I get the feeling like it's probably going to be unsatisfying.
It could be the great unfinished symphony of anime.
This feels kind of like a Pirates of Dark Water, but for anime.
What a deep cut. I loved me some Pirates of Dark Water. That was, they never finished it.
Yeah.
And I really dug it.
So it was kind of it's such a bummer when you see this happen. At the same time, though, I'll say one of the things that I love about this actual program is that it wasn't really, or it didn't feel like it was ever constrained by that typical 23-minute episode block. And so for this episode that we watched tonight, it's pretty much 50 minutes. And then a majority of the other episodes that we have border on the 27 to 23. I love the fact that it didn't seem to matter. The only thing that mattered was them actually getting to tell the story for that episode that they wanted to.
Right.
And because in watching the episode tonight, I don't know, Khelan, did you see any marks where they were like, we can now cut to commercial break?
Absolutely not. No, it didn't feel like, dun dun, here's a cliffhanger,
right.
And then brought to you by, Pop-Tarts. And then we come back to the, the second act or the third act, whatever it might be.
Right. No, it felt like everything was kind of a complete piece and seamlessly flowed from beat to beat to beat within the show itself.
Yeah.
So I love that. If you can tell already, I'm kind of gushing over this because of the fact that I had rented Bubblegum Crisis when I was working at a Blockbuster, and this is such a good show. Well, Doug, what a great recommendation already.
Yeah. I mean, nostalgia is a very powerful factor with some of the stuff that we're watching.
Absolutely. But to kind of give us a little bit of an overview and a synopsis, Khelan, you're going to help us out with this, right?
Sure. So the series begins in late 2032, which doesn't seem that far away now. It's like 13 years from now, 7 years after the second great Kanto earthquake that split Tokyo geographically and culturally in two. So I guess that earthquake is going to happen in about 7 years or so, 6 years.
Fingers uncrossed.
Yeah, absolutely. And during the first episode, disparities in wealth are shown to be more pronounced than in previous periods in post-war Japan. The main adversary is Genome, a megacorporation with immense power and global influence. Its main products are boomers, which are artificial cybernetic life forms that are usually in the form of humans, with most of their bodies being machine, also known as cyberoids. While boomers are intended to serve mankind, they become deadly instruments in the hand of ruthless individuals much like Roombas will be soon. You heard it here first. If you have a Roomba, watch out. The great revolution is coming. The 80 police are tasked to deal with the boomer-related crimes, and one of the series' themes is the inability of the department to deal with threats due to political infighting, red tape, and insufficient budget. Clearly, like, this came out in the late 80s. It feels a lot like the late 80s, and so it mixes a couple of different themes that I see from anime and also from science fiction from that era. One, this is 40 some odd years after Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Right.
And so clearly that is a huge cultural influence on Japanese fiction, from Godzilla to Astro Boy to, you name Akira, to other anime as well. And so they clearly had this sort of post-apocalyptic mindset, which makes for some really great fiction because they dealt with something that was really horrific in the past.
Absolutely.
But I'm also, I think this is very much influenced by a comic strip called Judge Dredd, which came out in the late 70s, early 80s. It was British, but took place in America, in a city called like Mega City 1.
Yeah, Mega City 1.
Yeah. And so what's funny is, to me, this came out in early 1987 in Japan, I believe. Right. This is the same year that RoboCop came out in the US, September of 87. And the similarities between the two were very jarring, where you have like the main adversary is an evil corporation. I'm trying to remember the name of the corporation in RoboCop.
Was it Omnicorp?
OCP. Yeah, Omnicorp. You're right. And they were ostensibly sort of privatizing a lot of like the security within Detroit. And it was all about turning a human being into the soulless creature, soulless killer, to be able to carry out their whims. Even though it was sort of like this weird partnership between the police and this company. So I got a lot of RoboCop vibes from it too. Obviously, a lot of vibes from like Terminator, Terminator 2, and sort of a lot of that sort of pre-millennium tension science fiction that was prevalent in the 80s and the 90s.
No, absolutely. I want us to start tonight with kind of understanding, as we do with every episode.
Yeah.
Digging in and unpacking this theme song.
Oh, I love it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Khelan, what are your thoughts about this theme song / sort of music video introduction segue into everything?
So as you introduced me, one of the things you said, I'm DJ by night. It's true. I'm a DJ in Washington, D.C. And one of the things that I did for a long time with fellow podcaster and DJ Adam Kasari, who's been on your show before.
Nice.
We used to have an 80s night called Breakfast Club. And so this is an 80s song. And all I got from this was Bonnie Tyler's Holding Out for a Hero. The way the song sounds, like I was like, what does this remind me of? And I was like, it's Bonnie Tyler Holding Out for a Hero, which is a quintessential 80s song. And the fact that our protagonist is, she's a badass by day and night, and also dons this blonde wig, puts on a mini skirt, a bass, and starts rocking out in a club. I loved it. It's very much of that era, and I just dug it.
No, I agree. It was really interesting because oftentimes we'll talk about whether or not we felt we had dedicated animation for the intro, or if this was something that was recycled from the episode.
Yeah.
And so it's nice to feel that not only was this dedicated animation, but they were splicing in segments of the actual the band that we have here is Priss and the Replicants, and they were playing at a club that is called Hot Legs, and they're doing this song Hurricane, which is so good, and there are just so many weird moments in the song itself, and memorable lines, like when they say big city. There's all these themes that they have about being lonely and just sort of child lost in love, and then sort of the want and the desire, but it ultimately ends up with just saying, I love you and give me touch.
Yeah, maybe the translation didn't quite make it through, but it's still a very catchy song.
Oh my God, it's a complete earworm.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that they use this to kind of segue in, not only from showing that you have a skyline where suddenly a building explodes and the genome building is in the background and kind of like towering over top of everything. You get a couple cutscenes of seeing, sort of people kind of living like their day to day, like their slice of Americana in the city. And so you see homeless, you see people kind of on the streets, you see women doing aerobics, which is so super, like in unison, which is so super 80. And it's wonderful. Mm-hmm. And then it kind of builds into this song where you're kind of in the middle of this music video. And then they use that as a way to also segue in and splice in some bits about a boomer that's loose in the city and how the 80 police are responding to these different districts that we have. And they're being wiped out. And so you have this balance of here's the song, and then it's like, give me touch, and it's a boomer crushing a police officer's head, and you're like, oh man, this is very graphic.
Both of us are somewhere in between Generation X and Millennial, and I've long thought that boomers would destroy our world too. So this is very, it's a little creepy to watch that.
It is. It's very creepy.
But like, I feel like music and rock stars are a big part of like anime culture, at least from this era.
Yeah.
Going back to Robotech, and then the Macross series and the Mospeada series that the Japanese names for them. In Macross, you had Lin May, as like one of the main characters and the love interest of Rick Hunter. Mospeada,
and she's like a recording artist too.
And so she ends up becoming this like huge pop star on SDF1. Mm-hmm. And then in Mospeada, the Invid Invasion segment of Robotech, you had Yellow Dancer, and she was trans,
really?
or rather, in the show they called him a cross-dresser, but it was clearly like he was non-binary. It was Lancer was the male version, and then Yellow Dancer was the female version, as like this famous rock star on Earth while the invasion's happening.
Interesting.
Yeah,
it's really crazy to see that, like in anime in the 80s, how progressive they were in terms of sexuality and what they were doing. Because that's not the only instance where you have in an animated form, people who were a little bit more gender fluid. Mm-hmm. For these different shows. And that's, I don't know, I like seeing that. It's fun to kind of notice and kind of especially go back in 2019 and notice that, hey, somebody was actually thinking about this. Somebody was writing about this. Somebody was including this in stories.
Absolutely. It's they were very progressive, as you said.
Right. I will say the one thing that is a little bit challenging for this sort of story within a story about the police and the band that we have as we're making this segue is that we don't sadly get a roll call in terms of who the characters are other than Pris. There are a large number of characters and you really do have to kind of listen in order to get their names. That's kind of challenging.
Right.
So we actually didn't get sort of a full roll call. You have Lena at one point who shows up in the audience for Pris's concert, kind of like nodding her head and smiling. And you're like, well, that's nice that she's being so supportive. And then she walks out to Silva's van and they kind of have a very quick conversation about the boomer that we have kind of had as the story, as this through line, throughout the music video portion of this, and that they're going to engage, and that Pris is probably going to be pissed because they're not getting paid for this.
Right.
And so that's sort of your introduction to the team, but there's more characters.
There are, and I felt like that was probably one of the weaknesses of this first episode is besides, not having a roll call, which I don't necessarily need. I'm happy to like kind of, in media res, like learn who the characters are. But I felt besides Pris, they were all kind of like, they just sort of faded into the background for me.
Yeah, it's kind of challenging sometimes.
It is. And I mean, again, I just watched the first episode. Clearly it's supposed to be 13, went on for 8. And if I'd kept watching, maybe I would have gotten a better sense for these characters. Right. But nobody really like stood out for me besides Pris.
Right. It's hard. It's always hard. What isn't hard is this is a bad segue, are some of the lines that we have that are drawn around a majority of our characters. And so I wanted to kind of pivot slightly, and we've talked a little bit about some of the character design. We've kind of talked around them a little bit, but Khelan, what did you think about the animation style, some of the inspirations? I know that we've kind of talked a little bit about them.
Yeah.
I've got a whole list of things as well.
I'm sure that our lists are probably very similar.
Yes.
Clearly, like Blade Runner, which came out in the early 80s.
Check.
I mentioned RoboCop, although RoboCop came out after this. I would say the first Terminator film, which was a few years before this.
Right.
The animation style, I think, is, considering it's 1987, is absolutely lovely. I think a lot of it's very seamless looking. It looks very ahead of its time. I think a lot of the drawings and illustrations look very cool and very interesting. And it's very fluid.
Yes.
It's clearly well ahead of what most American animators were doing right around this time, maybe with the exception of Disney. And this is before Disney's Renaissance. I mean,
Right.
Little Mermaid came out in like 1989.
Right.
And so, they were kind of like, sort of floundering during the mid to late 80s. I thought it looked wonderful, and it's clearly wears a lot of its influences on its sleeve.
No, I agree. I think one of the biggest things that you had mentioned was just how fluid everything looks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that they do just a fantastic job with action and battles.
For sure.
And that is in terms of sort of how they're actually framing some of the angles for the actual action itself. And then they're also using different camera lenses, such as there's a scene that we have very early on where they're firing at a boomer, and it's coming from like the actual video inside of the helicopter
Right.
that's chasing it. You have a lot of information from the HUD within the actual boomer itself, or the HUDs, the heads-up display that you have that's within the hard suits. So you have all these different kind of multiple angles and perspectives, and nothing seems static or boring the entire
Right.
time. Like it's really unbelievably enjoyable to watch the battle sequences, and they feel hard hitting.
They do. They feel, like they've got weight to them.
Yeah,
Nothing feels like it's like weightless or, kind of happening in a void.
Yeah. And so I agree with you on all the things that you had mentioned. I think you mentioned this earlier, the Akira
Yeah.
reference, and that's not even just in terms of actual animation style. I feel like that's in terms of actual animation content. We have some of these boomers at some point who hit critical mass and sort of
Turn into these like weird
like
inhuman
organic
monsters.
weed kind of creatures
Yeah.
that sort of are like biomass.
Yeah.
That permeate everything that's around, and it kind of goes into that weird whole Japanese tentacle thing, but no.
Yeah.
But it integrates into whatever organic is around it at any point, and
Right.
it's cool to kind of see that, because then these characters get larger than life. They get almost like the size of a city suddenly,
Absolutely.
and so I think that that's cool to see. It reminded me also of an anime that came out around the same time called Riding Bean. That was one of my favorites. That was just a movie. It was a one-off about a driver and his partner who would always take like these missions. That was super fun. And I got a lot of stuff that was on here from Ghost in the Machine.
Definitely Ghost in the Machine. And the movie Ghost in the Machine came out, I think, like in 95, 96.
Right.
But the manga, I think was 80s and 90s. But clearly, a lot of the folks who were doing manga and anime right around this time, I think there was like this sort of, what's the term I'm looking for here? Kind of like a shared headspace.
Right.
Of like they were all kind of delving into like similar inspirations. And so you had a lot of stuff that wasn't necessarily aping one or the other, but clearly, tapping into the same sort of source material.
Anything that you felt, because I know that, there's a lot of manga is very obviously present and prominent in Japanese culture.
Yeah.
Not even just for a lot of the cartoons that we talk about, having sort of a template or a roadmap from the actual manga to then transition into the OVA. Mm-hmm. I'm actually not sure if Bubblegum Crisis even had a manga prior to it.
I don't think it was prior to the OVA. I think they did one after.
It was right in between that and whatever the
Bubblegum Crash.
Yeah, Bubblegum Crash.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's interesting to see, because typically, you can take what you have in your manga and use that as a way to begin to storyboard everything that you have. We've seen that in a lot of a lot of anime series, of being able to kind of have that influence and sort of take some of those shots. Plus, it has that like, oh fuck moment when you have read the manga and then you see the show,
Yeah.
and you're like, oh, that they framed that perfectly. It looks wonderful.
Well, Akira is a great example of that, which is a phenomenal film. But if I watched the film first, and then I went back and read the manga and realized how in depth the story really goes. Because where you think the story ends in the movie, it doesn't really. And the manga keeps going and going and going. It's like 6 large volumes or 8 large volumes, and like it's so good.
2019 is my year to actually finally read Akira.
Yeah,
I've been talking about it for quite some time.
At one point, I owned all 6 volumes. I think in some move, I probably donated them to a library or sold them to Goodwill or something like that. I don't know what I did, but
no, awesome. We've talked a little bit about some of these characters, and so I know that we've talked about the fact that Pris really kind of took the spotlight. She's the first character out of the Nightsabers that we're introduced to. We probably have the most exposure to her in terms of what she's doing. I think we also get the best sense of her personality.
She also has the best hair. I mean, those bangs are to die for.
Love it. And it doesn't feel like she's wearing like helmet hair.
No.
Like we've seen in other anime, like where they have like the weird pompadour, and then they take off a helmet and their hair is in the shape of the helmet.
Yeah,
exactly. So I love the fact that this is something that kind of feels like it feels big without feeling like a helmet or too aggressive. It is, I don't know. I love the style for her as well.
Yeah.
So we have a bunch of other cast members that we have that are in here. And so I wanted to check and see, Khelan, is there anybody specific other than Pris that really kind of stood out to you that you really identified with?
So, stood out, yes. Identified, no. Leon McNichol, who was the representative of the AD police, who played every toxic male that we saw in every 80s and 90s sitcom. Like he's lauded, or even in like up to the 2000s, and even in this decade a little bit. Like he's like, hey, I'm gonna win you over with persistence. I'm like, you're getting real close to like date rape, dude. Like it's just this is like a pre #Me Too cartoon, and you can definitely see it. There's even a moment towards the end of the first episode where he keeps like asking her, and then she just drives away because she's not interested.
Yep.
And he almost says, well, maybe she's and like leaves it off. And clearly he's going to say she's a lesbian.
Yeah.
Which we never get a sense of her sexuality one way or the other. And if she was, cool. If she's not, cool. But like the fact that like he immediately goes to that because she's not interested in, it's like, I mean, he stood out, but in the worst way possible. Like he's just that guy,
And it's hard too because Leon McNichols in the series spinoff 80 Police Files takes a prominent role as well.
Of course he does. And does he have the same characteristics?
Yeah, I mean a little bit.
Yeah.
There actually is a member of the 80 police force who kind of flirts with him, with Leon, but he never seems to get the fact that another male coworker is kind of flirting with him.
Oh.
But the rest of the office, it's actually in episode 2 of Bubblegum Crisis.
Okay.
He makes some comment about how like they could get a hotel and relax. And he's like, I don't have time for that. And walks away, and the rest of the office just starts laughing at him.
Yeah.
And he seems to just be, like you said, kind of toxic, oblivious male figure that's there. He was in one of the 3 moments within this episode where I kind of cringed a little bit, and definitely it was I wonder if she's there were 2 others that were in there that we can talk about. Oh yeah, well
yeah.
One was what was it, Mac, the character Mac, who is it's Stingray's the leader of this. Her last name's Stingray.
Yeah.
Silva Stingray, and so Stingray's brother looks at her boobs at one point.
That's right.
And there's a moment where like the music changes, and I felt like almost the entire tone of the show changed.
Yeah.
And she kind of like slaps him with a newspaper. That was one thing for me. I was like, I don't know that we necessarily needed that.
Again, it's such a like shitty sitcom trope. It's like, oh, I'm leering at this woman, and like, let's make it funny, and like, she's gonna get mad at me, but she's not really mad at me. Like, I just hate it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the third and final one is something that we've actually talked about on our episode for Technoman 2 weeks ago, was women getting hit. And we have that moment where a boomer punches Pris like in the stomach.
Yeah.
And kind of like grabs her by the head and then hits her. And there are moments like that when that kind of happens where I don't enjoy it as much. Now, I understand, obviously, in terms of when this show was actually made, story, advancing the plot, you find out very quickly that he's a boomer, but he also is a male-looking boomer that assaults her and punches her right away. In the episode that we've had for Technoman, there was a lot of assault, and there was also some of those toxic male tropes where, somebody's persistently hitting on somebody. There was one character that we had named Ringo in Technoman who continued to say, hey, if we need to repopulate the earth, I'm a man, you're a woman, like we can make this happen.
Right.
And it's that kind of content when you watch it where you're like, oh, you are like, this didn't age well. You are really dating yourself.
Well, I mean, we haven't even gotten into like, this isn't even hentai. And like, I mean, hentai, a lot of hentai is incredibly anti-woman, anti-feminist. And it's just, it's pretty bad.
Yeah. So any other notable characters from you? I know we talked about Leon, we talked about Pris, we talked about Stingray. We have Lena, who is the woman who wears sort of the suit and tie. She kind of looks like Paula Poundstone.
Oh yeah, she does look like Paula Poundstone.
A little bit.
Yeah, good reference.
I kind of liked it.
Yeah.
We have Nene, who's a little bit more of the more kind of kawaii, kind of cute character. She's shorter.
She's got the purple hair, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
And then we have Mason, who is sort of the final bad guy that we.
So he didn't, like, character-wise, like, he just seemed kind of generic bad guy, but visually, like, when he transformed, I thought was very unsettling.
Oh, yeah.
Like, cause, like, he's still human or humanoid at the very, like, his upper torso, and then his lower torso becomes boomer, and it's very jarring.
Oh, so the guy that you're talking about, that's actually F.G. Frederick.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
The other guy, Mason, is the person who actually, for Genome, he is like the guy who's in charge, and he's Brian J. Mason. Because when they say it, they're like Brian J. Mason.
Yeah,
and it seems threatening.
Yeah,
it's like he's a good bad guy, but we're not. It's one of those things where you're like, is he a boomer? Is he not a boomer?
Oh, okay. All right.
But he's making moves and he's making plans even in this early episode to kind of set them up for success because, they're interested in acquiring, boomers. They're interested in essentially stealing technology from the USSD, which is this sort of group that, is creating some of this biomechanical warfare stuff that they have. And so, you learn about sort of some of the conspiracy very early on where they're saying like, this Genome needs to steal information and stuff from USSD. And Brian J. Mason says, I can get that to you within 24 hours. And you're like, oh, okay.
All right. Well, he's very efficient apparently.
Fucking creep. It's just so weird. Well, I think we've hit it on some of these shitty characters.
Yeah, there's quite a few.
But I wanted to get into sort of some of the plot, the meat and potatoes of this show. Now, We're obviously not going to go beat by beat through a lot of the things that we have, but I've got a bunch of questions kind of to help kind of guide us through this. But I wanted to just check and see, Khelan, was there anything from this episode that didn't get answered for you that we can kind of help answer? That we can kind of help figure out?
Yeah, I felt like it kind of the resolution and with the young girl who they're trying to rescue.
Yeah,
they didn't really get into like who she is and why she's so important. At least I didn't pick up on that throughout this episode.
It's hard because they do it in sort of almost like a montage very quickly at a point where they. It's something that if you blink, you will miss it, where it sort of shows her body on like an operating table towards the very end.
Oh, okay.
Where you realize that she's also maybe not a boomer, but I guess for all intents and purposes, she is a boomer, but she's actually used as a targeting system for the satellite itself.
Oh, okay.
And so that's like the big detail that they don't use is that sort of when they talk about and they're recruited, by the USSD to recover Cynthia and find this FG Frederick guy. That the Night Sabers believe that it's just simply like a kidnapping, that they need to go find these two people.
Right.
Then they find out that, Frederick is a boomer.
And
they
Cynthia
think that Cynthia is still, they think that she's still a human.
Yeah.
When they actually find out, like towards the very end, when Frederick kind of goes full Akira and kind of like integrates like into her legs.
Yeah.
And she has that like weird robot flashback, that she's the one that actually targets the orbital satellite, I think, presumably to kind of like blow them up.
So then my question is, because you've watched the remainder of these episodes, at least you've seen the first 6 very recently. Is there like a through line story, or is it more episodic from episode to episode?
Yeah, I mean the through line really is sort of the genome, kind of introducing these weapons, and just sort of the USSD kind of unsure how to handle and respond to a lot of this.
So is there a different weapon in each episode? Is it episodic in that sense?
Yeah, I mean, you've got like a different boomer,
okay,
in like a different boomer, or you've got like a different person who's got information that they need to get in pretty much every episode. So yeah.
Got it.
I've got some questions that I have. And so I wanted to check and see, in your lifetime, do you feel that we are going to have home supporting robots?
Absolutely.
Okay.
I mean, we've got, as I mentioned before, we've got Roombas. They clean your floor, but they're going to overtake humanity before we know it. They're the precursor of Skynet, as far as I'm concerned. But I mean, sure. I mean, to be a little less tongue in cheek, I mean, we have Google Home and the Amazon Echo. We have Siri on our phones, or if you have an iPhone. We're going to have self-driving cars in the next 10 to 15 years. Right. Absolutely. I think, the sort of robots are already part of our lives, or some kind of nascent artificial intelligence is already, part of our lives. And I think there's something very exciting and very, very scary about that in the next, the next several years.
I think the concept, and sometimes what I hear it referred to as like human automation, of just being able to say, what are some of the normal, regular, everyday things that you have that's a part of your life? How do you make it faster? How do you make it easier? How do you make it more accessible? How do you stay better informed?
Right.
And so I'm always a little bit nervous about some of that. I also have worked in the tech field for 13 years now. And so there's a part of me that's like, oh no, I really do want this. I do want this assistance. Like I use tech and for just about every part of my daily life.
Absolutely. Same here.
And so
I think we all do.
There's a part of me that's, there's a part of me that always makes sure that there's like an hour a day where I don't do it, to kind of like give myself a break, whether it's me going to the gym or just kind of like putting my phone down. But I definitely do try to take better breaks.
That's good. I think that's important
for things, and that I think that's sometimes helpful.
So my phone, I just got a new iPhone recently, and it tells me like how many hours I average a day looking. And the last notification I got scared the living shit out of me. I'm like, I do what now? Like, I cannot believe I look at this phone that much. But for those who know me, they're like, yeah, of course you do. Like, you're always on social media. You're always looking down at your phone. You're always fiddling with it. And it's as I'm doing this right now as we're talking. And so, it's yeah. To answer your question again, absolutely. I think we're already there, and now it's just sort of a question of scale.
Right. I think there's a question of scale for me, and there's a question of how human are we going to make them look. I was in LAX airport on a layover this weekend. And I was outside of a restaurant that they had that's there, and it had one of those like small robots, and it was holding an iPad, and it had the menu that was on the iPad. And you could walk up and you could stand in front of it, and it would greet you and say, "Hi, welcome to this restaurant. What can I help you with?"
No, that's creepy.
And it was creepy. And I went over to it and I pressed menu.
Yeah.
And the menu would not show or display, and I just went, I'm just gonna get a fucking paper.
And then it said resistance is futile, and yeah.
It's like, come with me if you want to live. And I was like, this is weird.
This is really fucking weird.
Like, how did you get the screen through security, robot? And it's like, don't worry. And then it put sunglasses on. That was the weird moment.
And did it say where we're going, we don't need roads?
Yeah, exactly. Jesus.
Every 80s reference, just throwing it in there. Yeah.
And then we watched the movie Roadhouse. And so I took a paper menu and I started looking at it, and another guy comes up to this robot and it does the, hi, welcome to this restaurant. What can I get you? And this guy, no lies, spent 3 minutes talking to this robot where he was like, salad, show me salads. And it goes, I can't find what you're looking for. He goes, salads, show me salads. He's like, maybe you should get a paper menu. I was like, this robot's fucking smart. Maybe this guy should get a paper menu. But he persisted and was just like, show me chicken salads. And it would not comply with what he wanted. And there was a part of me that's like, this automation seems awesome and it seems nice. It's great to have access to this information. Right. It's great to use new technology and give it a shot, try it out.
Right.
In this moment, definitely not fucking working.
Right.
It's really bad. I wanted to get your opinion. I know we talked a little bit about the fact that we have these boomers. They're also called cyberoids.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think in this series that they have boomers for sex?
For sure.
What do you think that they would be called?
Boobers? No, that was really bad. I think
you're gonna be really upset when I tell you the name of them.
Am I really?
Yeah.
Like, are they? Is it just horrible or disappointing?
It's grown worthy.
Okay.
They're called sexoroids. Like cyberoids, they're just called sexoroids.
It seems kind of lazy.
It's really
I hope they're not lazy at sex.
I would hope not too.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be a bummer.
Mm.
So, not being lazy, we have Genome and we have USSD. And I wanted to just check and see, they seem to be sort of this very prevalent driving force in terms of what we have in this city, what's going on. They seem to, Genome almost seems to control the military in this sense. And do you feel that that Genome or the USSD, do you feel or believe, just kind of based on this first episode impression, that they feel as an entity that they're above the law?
100%.
Okay.
And again, this is going back to a lot of science fiction from this era, 80s and 90s, where it tends to be corporations tend to be the ones who end up unleashing this Pandora's box. I mean, thinking about Ridley Scott's Alien and then Aliens by what's his name? What's the director's name of Aliens? He did Titanic as well.
Oh, James Cameron.
James Cameron. I couldn't think of his first name. You have Weyland Yutani. Is that the name of the
Weyland Yutani.
Weyland Yutani is the name of the company that ultimately unleashes the xenomorph.
Right.
And then in Aliens, they're trying to weaponize the xenomorph for warfare and to make profit off of it. Skynet, it was a company, in Terminator, and ends up becoming, creating this robotic apocalypse across the world. And so there is this very real skepticism and outright hostility towards corporations that remain unchecked in a lot of this fiction. And I feel like that's definitely in here as well. And then there's this sort of like chess match that's happening between Genome and the what's the name of the other entity?
USSD.
I almost call it the SDF-1, but that's the spaceship in Macross. And so it's like governmental entity versus a corporation.
Right.
But the governmental entity obviously isn't, free of any wrongdoing as well. Clearly they're corrupt and they're inept and they're stopped by bureaucracy and red tape. And so they've got their own problems.
No, I agree. So given that we have these two entities that really kind of are above the law, and we also have this separate group of Night Sabers that are fighting them, do you feel that the Night Sabers are actually equipped to be able to bring these two entities to justice?
So I think it's a bit of a David v. Goliath story, and I think we tend to root for these sort of underdogs,
Right.
Who are always caught in the situations that they're definitely in above their heads, and so that's what makes for great fiction. I'm sure this plucky group of cybernetic warriors can somehow pull it through. Otherwise, why are we watching?
No, I agree. I mean, it's funny to hear them talk about the fact that their hard suits are more advanced even than what the military has.
Right.
Which leads you to believe, why haven't you guys been able to build these yourself or use them or militarize this?
Right.
I don't know. I would think in all the years that I've ever worked in technology, if I would create something that would have life-threatening consequences or an impact, I would build a fail-safe in. I would do something
Sure.
to try to figure out a countermeasure to what I'm doing.
Sure.
It's hard. But I wanted to ask, since you kind of talked about this plucky group of mechanized women fighting the good fight, I wanted to get your impression. The Night Sabers, would you consider them to be mercenaries, vigilantes, or terrorists?
Yes.
Yes?
All three.
Okay.
I mean, but it's all like kind of perspective.
Correct.
If you're, if you're a bystander that's being affected negatively by the company, they're superheroes, they're vigilantes, to a certain degree, but they're still above the law.
Right.
They're clearly for hire, so they're mercenary in that respect. And if you're the corporation, they're terrorists because they're blowing up your shit.
Right. They're destroying the products that you stole.
They are. And so I like that there are some shades of gray. I mean, clearly they are the protagonists and clearly they're the good guys.
Right.
But, they're definitely engaging in some wanton destruction and leaving a lot of collateral damage.
Yeah. The thing that strikes me so funny is the fact that when we're introduced them initially at the very beginning of the episode, they talk about the fact that they're doing a job, but they're doing it without getting paid.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like that to me. I was like, that's either a mercenary who's not good at negotiating a deal, or that's a vigilante. And then it seemed like every mission that they went on from that point forward, like they were getting promised money, like 20 million yen,
right,
if they could complete this job, this task. But then there was always some caveat that they weren't fulfilling that was allowing them to not get paid, or to allow the USSD to say, we're not going to pay you because you didn't recover Cynthia. She got blown up by an orbiting target satellite.
They're mercenaries without business degrees, which is clearly they needed somebody who knows finance and
some type of a collections agency where they could just be like, hey, we've got a processing area of, the Bubblegum Crisis organization,
right,
that, will help you in terms of invoicing and processing those invoices and purchasing orders. Guys, this shouldn't be that hard.
Yeah. So speaking of the name Bubblegum Crisis, I looked this up actually, why it was called that.
Okay.
And I don't know if you know the background.
I did, but please share it.
Okay. Well, yeah, I'm sure you did. But I always thought it was such a weird name, and it's kind of a cool name, but it's like the moment right before a bubble from a bubblegum pops and creates this sticky mess.
Right.
And so this is they're on the threshold or the precipice of before this utter disaster hits their world, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. I had a bubblegum crisis of my own when I was a kid. I wear glasses. I usually wear contacts.
Yeah.
I was in middle school and I was in a chemistry class, and we had something where the teacher was trying to explain to us about, bubblegum. There was some science lesson that we were learning. We all got to chew a ton of gum. I blew a huge bubble that was the size of my face, and
Whoa.
It popped and it stuck to my glasses.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I was a kid. I was probably 12, 13 years old. I went home and I tried to clean my glasses in the sink with soap and a sponge, what I thought was a sponge. It was a Brillo pad. And I just
destroyed your glasses.
I just destroyed both lenses in this glass. And when my mom saw, she was livid. I mean, she really freaked out. So that's my only bubblegum crisis.
That's a pretty minor one, all things considered. I'm sure at the time it was pretty major.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was that was bad. But yeah, I read the same thing. I thought it was always a fascinating name, and to read that story, I was like, okay, yeah, I like this.
Yeah.
This is like it's simple, but it's very catchy, you know? So one of the other things that we had in this show that was simple and catchy was the fact that we talked about we have a band that
Yeah.
Pris is in. Pris and the Replicants. And so I had mentioned that they played their single Hurricane at a club that is called Hot Legs.
Great name.
And so I love it. Everything about those four things: stage name, band name, club that you would perform at, single.
Yeah.
Khelan, I wanted to ask, what would your stage name be? What would you do? You want the do you want to do it in pieces, or you want to do it all together?
All together.
All together?
Yeah.
So the questions I have for you is, what would your stage name be?
Yeah.
What would be the name of your band?
All right.
What is the club that you would perform at? And what's the name of your hit single?
Okay. So when you introduced me, you said that I was a nerdy podcaster. I've got a podcast we'll talk about a little later called Homo Superior, and we focus a lot on nerdy stuff, but mostly on the X-Men. So I'm a huge X-Men geek. So bear that in mind as I give you my name.
Good.
So I would be Femma Frost, and my band is the Hellfire Dub. And we're performing at Club Cerebro.
Oh, I love this.
And our single is called Checkmate.
Ooh.
Because Emma Frost is the White Queen,
Right.
Hellfire Club. So yeah.
No, that is great.
Yeah. Do you have one too?
I do. So my band name would be Spike and the Synthetics, and we're playing at a bar that's called Drunk Grandma. And our hit single is Colossal Thunder.
I can imagine Drunk Grandma. Every drink is served in a mason jar.
Oh my God, yeah.
And not only is smoking allowed, it's encouraged, but
every-
only from a cob pipe.
Every drink goes on, instead of a coaster, it's just doilies. Couches that are in there are like wrapped in like the grandma bubble wrap.
Excellent. And then they put like a Werther's original in every cocktail.
Oh my God. It's just any end table or place that there's just always like a random assortment of mints that you don't know how they got there.
But it's one giant mint that's sort of fused together because it's just been there for so long.
It's like the ultimate mint.
Yeah, I love it.
I love it. That's perfect.
That's great.
I don't know why Drunk Grandma is
Drunk
just
Grandma is a great name for a bar.
Oh man, I love it. No, any final questions, Khelan, that you have about Bubblegum Crisis?
So I'm curious about like the timeline. So does 80 Police take place concurrently, or is it a sequel to Bubblegum Crisis? I know Bubblegum Crash is obviously a sequel to
Right.
Bubblegum Crisis.
I think that it is. I think it's after everything that we have for Bubblegum Crisis, and so I think that this comes sort of in the sequel sense, but it pivots very hard and kind of only focuses on on Leon.
Mm-hmm.
So he kind of gets the solo attention that he wants and deserves. But I think that show only actually went 3 episodes total.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah.
That's it?
It was very, very short.
Okay.
Because I remembered like when you rent the VHS, all the episodes came, I think, on one VHS, and I was like, well, this is great. Are there more? No.
No. All right.
Nothing else was out there. So, man. All right. Well, before we get to our opinions, turns out that you listen right now. Oh boy, you have opinions. You have a lot of opinions, and you love to post them online, and we are going to honor those opinions by handing this over to longtime listener and friend of the show, Bobby Anthem, for this week's Love It or Hate It. Bobby, take it away.
Our Love It this week is titled Girls in Mech Suits Battle Cyborgs Plus Great Japanese Pop Music, written by MVW8 in September 1998. It says, "This series of 8 videos is by far my favorite Japanese animation series. My other favorites are Akira, superb details, excellent coloring scheme, and artistic aspects, and Ghost in the Shell, great opening scene, strong atmosphere, but my heart is captured by Bubblegum Crisis and its cast of female characters. One of its strongest features, especially in the first episodes, is the soundtrack. Albeit in general, Japanese pop music sounds pretty childish to most listeners. The songs from Bubblegum Crisis have something special to them. 10 out of 10. And our Hate It is titled This is Classic Anime, written by Right Peach 8 in March 2002. This one is edited for length, and Right Peach says, "What a dreadful disappointment Bubblegum Crisis turned out to be. The episode I inflicted on myself featured a lackluster plot about a vengeful motorist in a Batmobile, and I only managed half of it before falling asleep, literally, not figuratively. On the plus side, the animation is superb. I won't contest that. Both the beauty and action scenes are handled with genuine style and panache. And while we're praising, there was a half-decent effort to convincingly portray a disturbed individual slipping into insanity. But all that is ruined utterly and completely by the genre silliness. The whole concept of the gal group kicking ass is childish, but it doesn't have to be, and childishly handled. What is a simpering bimbo doing in the group? You'd evict her in a second. The essentially juvenile fantasy fulfillment girl action jarred badly with the pretensions towards serious drama with the Batmobile driver. It was just a big old mess. Akira showed that you don't have to stick to the genre plot devices or caricatures to produce an anime film. Avoid, avoid, avoid. 1 out of 10.
I love that the hated for this asks the question, is this classic anime? I don't know how much more classic, at least for me, you can kind of get.
It's very classic.
With this. I don't know. This is maybe one of the few times where like I vehemently disagree so much with the hated. I'm like, I want to hate the hate it that they wrote here. It seems ridiculous.
Yeah.
So, but to each his own. So fair enough to you, person who hated it. You get your own spotlight on our show. Wonderful. Right now, though, we are going to figure out what our recommendations are.
Mm-hmm.
So obviously, we can either recommend something. You don't have to recommend it. And if you don't recommend it, you can give it the Roger Rabbit style dip, which erases it from the annals of cartoon history forever. And we won't talk about it on the show unless we are making fun of it. Khelan, what is your impression of Bubblegum Crisis?
I think I would recommend it for sure. It clearly isn't without problems, as we talked about over the last hour or so. But it is, to your point, Sean, it is such a foundational anime that it's almost like a time capsule.
Yeah.
Like watching like it for the aesthetics, the music, the style. I think, so many things that came after it were very, very foundational. And we had this conversation on my podcast about like certain comics, that were, well, like, why should we read them? It's like, well, they're foundational. Like, things like Watchmen or Dark Knight Returns or Mouse are foundational. Or even if you go to movies, it's like Casablanca. Somebody watches Casablanca now and says, well, this just seems really cliched. Well, no, it created those cliches. So that's why it seems cliched. So yeah, I would absolutely recommend it for that reason. I do think the characters are a little lackluster. They sort of like recede into the background with the exception of
Priss.
Priss, yes, thank you. I can barely remember her name. But other than that, they seem kind of unremarkable in a way, but it's still a worthy show to watch.
Right. It's crazy because I'm going to recommend the show as well, in the sense that some of these characters aren't remarkable. The feats and what they're able to accomplish is remarkable. The fact that they are able to gather the attention and from these big corporations, as well as also the military, in kind of enacting this mercenary justice throughout the city. For every reason that we've talked about on here, even the bad parts of it, even sort of some of the things that they have that are in here that did not age well, I still think that this is really one of those spot on perfect examples that if somebody was to say, hey, I'd like to get into anime, there's probably maybe two things that I would recommend that people watch, like to set that foundation. Akira, Ninja Scroll, Bubblegum Crisis.
Ninja Scroll, wow. Yeah, that's definitely a good one.
So those are really like the three that I would kind of try to introduce. And as you said, to kind of set the table or build that foundation, for everybody, because it has so many great tropes. It has so many wonderful moments that are in it. And you you hope that you build and you get to learn a little bit more about some of these characters. But in a way, it's sort of just to give you that glimpse of what a potential future would look like, what 2032 could potentially look like for us.
13 short years.
Yeah, 13 short years.
Yeah.
With some of these things, and it's crazy just to think, in terms of movies, whenever they date themselves, whenever they throw those dates out, and you think, oh, well, it's never going to happen. We're never going to get to that point.
Well, I remember reading V for Vendetta as a kid, set in the far future of 1997.
Yep. Yeah, and I love when we get to that point. There's a moment where I'm probably when we get to 2032, where I'm going to rewatch all of Bubblegum Crisis and be like,
I'm sure.
Are we there yet? Do we have these cyberoids? Are boomers a thing?
I know, or sexoroids. Is that where people are going to go to get off?
So, for all the mistakes that I think we've mentioned, but also all the positives that we have for this show, I would definitely recommend this. Doug, thank you for recommending this. Thank you for allowing Khelan and I to kind of jump back into the world of Mega Tokyo and really kind of just go down this path. And so much appreciated. So, Khelan, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been great.
This has been fantastic. Thank you for being here. And I wanted to ask, is there anything that you would like to promote? Where could the good folks find you online as well?
Sure. So a couple of things. One, I am part of a podcast called Homo Superior. Mm-hmm. It's 5 gay men based in DC talking about X-Men and other nerdy things. You can find us on iTunes and SoundCloud. And you can also look for us on social media on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Just type in Homo Superior. You'll find us. We're a very... stylish looking X that definitely evokes what we're trying to represent. If you live in DC, I DJ at a bar called Trade and occasionally another bar called Number 9. So come hear my tunes. I play a lot of 80s stuff, just cool. Fair warning there. And if you want to find me personally on Twitter, I'm at Khelan B. That's Khelan, just letter B after that. Find me on Twitter and I can talk. You'll hear me talking about some political nonsense. So
awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. And for anybody listening, there are 3 episodes that I think that I was on of Homo Superior.
You were officially on 2, but I
was in the background for the Christmas
you showed up
special.
on the 3rd one. Yeah. So you were on for She-Ra. You were on for Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
That's right.
And then you were on for our Christmas special where we got really dumb. And so thanks for putting up with us, Sean.
No, absolutely. It was a joy. I think I did not get a single marshmallow in Clark's mouth during the game portion.
You think he's joking,
podcast.
Listeners, but no, we actually tried to do that, and he was not able to get any marshmallows into Clark's mouth.
And I failed pretty hard, so womp womp. Bummer. No, so definitely go check out Homo Superior. I had a fun being on their show, and you may have heard other people who have been guests on this show, such as Ryan Kroll and Adam Kosaria-Min on our She-Ra episode that we had last July, as well as also on our BoJack episode that we had that was in this past November. So definitely go check out those episodes, but also go check out Homo Superior. Super fun podcast.
Thanks so much, Sean.
Because you can hear Ryan scream in the background all the time.
We really got to lower his volume. Do something. Soundproof him. Put him in another state.
Ryan's the best. I love him.
Yeah.
So you heard him on this week's episode. Our buddy Bobby Anthem. Find him on Twitter, @BobbyAnthem. Send him a message. Show him some love. He is simply the best. As for me, I perform live improv comedy with a group that's called Nox. That's NOX ! We perform with Washington Improv Theater. You can find tickets and times witdc.org. I'm also on Twitter and Instagram @SeanPaulEllis. Want to support us here on the show? Man, it's super easy. Just tell a friend. Review us on Apple iTunes. I know it's boring. It super helps us though. You can always slide into our DMs on Twitter @MorningTunes. Just remember, that's morning with you. You can check us out on Instagram and Facebook @Saturday Morning Cartoons. Drop us an old-fashioned email @SaturdayMorningCartoons@gmail.com. You can find all of these links, everything that we have on all of our social media bios under our link tree, which you can find shows that we've already watched. You can find where you can find us to listen online, such as YouTube, Apple Podcasts and iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, Spotify, probably by the time you hear this, iHeartRadio, wherever fine podcasts are sold. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we will be back in March with more listener suggestions. So thank you guys. We'll talk to you soon.
Hey, everybody.
Thanks a lot for listening to Saturday Morning Cartoons. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to transform and roll out.